You know, I could play the rest of Holmes's maps properly. Or I could just use the warp staff. Hello and welcome to the ear arc of my Warp Skip Saga Champions of Utena low turn count playthrough. In this video, we are going to be unleashing the full power of the warp staff and completing no less than 6 maps in a single go. And the first of those maps is Chapter 30, which is a decently large map with a bunch of monsters scattered around and a siege objective. But the funny thing about this map is that the siege point is actually unoccupied, and in a speedrun that allows us to simply warp Holmes directly there and end the map almost instantly. Since this is an LTC though, we're not actually going to do it that fast. Instead, Lyria is going to get some singing practice in. And then after that, Sierra is going to warp across and kill the boss of this map, which is a generic archmogul. The houses scattered around this map all teach a range of offensive skills, although they can each be used only one time. But we don't have to worry about skipping those, because this is one of the locations that we can return into to do an exploration sequence to get those skills learned later on. Now we have Sierra warping over to kill the boss, and in the process she is going to gain a full level, and that's going to give her a speed proc, which means that Sierra has now reached the required speed benchmark for her endgame strats. This is a pretty easy map to reset in order to rig any stats on her that you need, but I didn't actually end up having to do that. So we've got that, and now Holmes is free to seize and clear the map in one turn. In the subsequent cutscene, we are going to meet up with the new character Yoda, known as the Runeblade of Zoa, and he actually teaches the Astra skill to Julia in this cutscene if she is with Holmes here. And that would be amazing if we had been using Julia at all. So instead, let's talk about Yoda himself. He joins after this map, and he is a swordmaster with some seriously ridiculous stats. Besides that, he has a number of powerful skills, including no fewer than 3 random proc skills: Draco, Astra, and Lethality. So Yoda is an exceptional boss killer, and we are going to be using him for that purpose for the remainder of the game. So, with Chapter 30 out of the way, we are going to be moving on to the Tower of Morse. The Tower of Morse is a dungeon with 5 skirmishes consecutively, and we're going to be skipping all of them using the warp staff, which I can do because the objective of each skirmish is to seize. But in addition to that, there are things that I'm going to be doing on every floor of the dungeon, which we'll go over now. Firstly, on each floor, Sierra is going to be warping around to get a kill, or at least some chip damage. Sierra is at her speed benchmark, as I mentioned, but there's actually a higher speed benchmark that it is somewhat useful to hit, and so continuing to give Sierra levels is a good way to go. As well as that, she is still some way from capping her magic, and getting her up there just makes her more deadly. So there's plenty of reason to continue to use Sierra just to gain experience here. Sometimes an enemy will actually spawn on the siege point on a floor in the Tower of Morse, and in those cases I would have Sierra warp over to kill that unit so that Holmes could then be warped to seize immediately instead of going for the high value experience targets like I do here. The other thing I'm doing on each floor is, after Renee warps Holmes, I am having Lyria sing for her. The intention behind this is to potentially give Renee the chance to warp Junie to one of the treasure chests. There are 2 treasure chests that can be opened on each floor, and each of them can have some rare items within them. Now, the one time in this final run that I actually successfully refresh Renee happens on the 2nd floor, And what actually ends up happening is that I accidentally have Renee wait rather than warping Junie over. So this doesn't end up coming to anything, but it does give Lyria more experience towards level 15 and her max range sing. You may have noticed that I'm doing this entire run in one go without saving between the maps, and because of that, if I was to reset, I would lose a fair bit of progress, and there's absolutely no guarantee that I would be able to get that successful sing proc again. So it's a much better idea to just carry on, even though I messed up my inputs on Renee. So those are the things that happen on every floor of this tower run. There is one more thing about the Tower of Morse that I will discuss now, and that relates to Krishna. In the story of this game, Krishna originally joined Holmes's party in the hopes that she could use the Darkron in order to revive her dead boyfriend. And after chapter 29, when we got Renee back, Krishna assumes that we will no longer be going to the Tower of Morse, because we no longer need to use the Darkron. And so, if she's with Holmes's army, she actually steals away with the Darkron, removing herself from our army for a while. And that means that we have to recruit her back on the 5th floor of the Tower of Morse. Depending on what versions of her events occur, it's possible to be able to recruit her back with either Shigen or Holmes. And if you want to do this event in an LTC run, you really want to be able to re-recruit her with Shigen. But even that means that you would have to warp Shigen instead of warping Holmes to the seize point. And so you would have to rely on Lyria refreshing Holmes in order to get him over to the seize point under his own power on that floor. Because of that, it is way better to just do what I did and send Krishna with Runan, circumventing this issue entirely. There is an interesting glitch that you can do with Krishna in the tower in a displayed low turn count run that allows you to duplicate items. But because it requires you to re-enter the Tower of Morse, that would cost turns to perform in this kind of run. So that's why I didn't bother doing it. You'll notice that I haven't actually been making particularly good decisions with Sierra in the last couple of floors, because even though there are entombed on those floors that I could warp over to and kill for a full level up, for some reason I didn't do that. This is a mistake that I saw no reason to correct, as Sierra still does everything that I would want her to. And the same is true of what happens on the 4th floor, where she is not strong enough to one-round KO the Archmogul that she attacks. I could have used an Ensorcel Staff use on her to get that kill, but I didn't want to waste the resource just in case I needed it later on. So we're now moving on to the final floor of the Tower of Morse. Krishna would spawn in the upper middle room here, so you can see what a pain it would be to recruit her with Holmes in a low turn count setting. And that's actually what I expended quite a lot of effort trying to do in my old LTC run, because I did not realize at that point that Shigen was able to recruit her as well. So I was trying desperately to get Holmes up there and then to the seize point in 2 turns if possible. The best I could do is 4, but at some point I realized that Holmes couldn't actually re-recruit Krishna in that save anyway. That discovery led to me being able to easily one-turn it by warping Shigen over, because in that run I had Plum with Holmes's group in this stretch rather than Lyria. As you can see, on this floor the group starts very close to the seize point, although Holmes is still 2 moves away from it. And so it's not too difficult to get him over there in a more casual run. Anyway, Lyria has now gotten her singing practice in, and Holmes is seized to complete the Tower of Morse in 5 turns. And on the top floor there are a couple of things we can do, the first of which is picking up these 2 treasure chests here. The first of these chests contains the Goddess Shield, which is an excellent item that negates critical hits and effective damage against the holder. As you can imagine, that is going to be very useful in some difficult upcoming maps. The item in the other chest is a Canticle Tome, which is a light tome with the same properties as the Sylphid tome. I have found this quite useful in the past, but in this run it's not as good because not very many of my units are even capable of using light tomes. The final thing we can do in the Tower of Morse is resurrect a unit using the Dark Ruin, which we do by talking to Mimai, the shaman who's standing there. Obviously I have no need to do that, so the option doesn't come up. After completing the final chapter, just before the epilogue, you are given the option to warp back here and use any remaining uses of the Dark Ruin to resurrect units then as well. So you will always have an opportunity to resurrect units who die, as long as they die while they are blue. And once again, in my last LTC, I actually had to take advantage of that, because Lyria died in the final map, and I was too worn out to reset for her. So now our 6 maps are done, but the video is not yet over, because we are now going to go back into the town of Ir to learn some skills from the houses that I skipped over earlier. I have a couple of units who want these offensive skills, the first of which is Tom, because he is already having to rely on a critical hit later on in the game, and I wanted to give him a proc to give him slightly more reliability there. I am not actually sure whether any of these skills are able to activate while the user is using a ballista, so this might have been completely unnecessary, but it was worth doing just in case. However, a large number of these skills I know are not going to work with a ballista. There are only 3 of them that could potentially work. Adept is no good because it runs off the user's attack speed, and while using a ballista, Tom has negative attack speed and thus would have a 0% chance of activating Adept. Meanwhile, Soul only restores HP and doesn't increase damage, so that's out too. Because of that, we teach Terra to Tom, in the hopes that it will help us later on. And that leaves the Adept house free for Sierra to learn. The higher speed benchmark that I was talking about earlier in this video is pretty steep and not likely to be reached, so giving Sierra Adept gives me a random chance to gain the benefits of being able to attack twice, even though I'm probably not going to be reaching that speed benchmark. The final thing that I'm doing in Air is having Lee pull out the Hamern staff from the convoy and use it to restore the warp staff's uses. The warp only has 6 uses left at this point, which would have been enough to warp Junie on all 5 of the floors of the Tower of Morse, but it is nowhere near enough to keep us going for the rest of the game, so that's why we use the Hamern staff here. Additionally, this means that Lee is holding on to it for when we get to the reunion. The next thing to occur is that Holmes has to cross a desert in order to reunite with Runan, and when crossing this desert, any thieves in his army will dig up an item in an event. Junie is going to dig up a Canto scroll for us, which is extremely nice. And if Bud were here, she would dig up a Wyvern flute, which is the second one available in the game, and the only other one that isn't a random drop in the Tower of Morse. But unfortunately, Bud is with Runan, so we are not going to be getting the Wyvern flute. And then we have this ominous cutscene in which Katri is found and kidnapped by the cult of Gerxel. And in the absence of this development, Runan and Holmes would probably have stuck together in the next reunion. So this provides the motivation for our final separation of armies. But for now, our armies are reunited, and we will go over the preparations there in the next video. I'll see you then.